In this video, I'm going to walk you through how you might send a casual email request to a coworker. And this is actually an extension of what we saw previously when we looked at a couple examples of what I call the request sandwich templates. And you should know from the first video on the overview of coworker networking, as well as going through those templates, that generally with coworkers, it's a better bet to go in person, perhaps to speak to them over instant messenger, to casually go for coffee or to get food together, something along those lines, and to make your request there when it's very natural and to just kind of do it spontaneously on the spot. But you can't always do that. In some cases, as we saw previously, a coworker will be reluctant to introduce you to someone else. Maybe he just doesn't know people that well in the investment banking group. He knows some names, he's met people there a few times, but he doesn't know them well enough and he's not comfortable enough to actually set up an in-person meeting for you. So sometimes you have to go through email. One common scenario in which this occurs is when you're trying to get referrals, whether they're to headhunters or to different companies, or maybe you're just trying to find out more about the buy side recruiting process, for example, and you want to speak to someone who's more knowledgeable. What tends to happen at banks a lot of times is that people from the same class year, so for example, analysts who start all in one year will tend to stick closely together, and they, in a lot of cases, won't know the analysts above them all that well. So sometimes, if that's the case, you're better served by going through email if you don't have the relationship, if you don't know the person that well, and it's actually appropriate to go and ask for a quick meeting, grabbing coffee quickly and such via email instead. And as we saw with some of the other email templates in this course, there's really not too much different here. A lot of these points are the same as what we went through before. You always want to keep it short and get straight to the point. This is especially the case with coworkers. You don't really need to go into as much of an introduction about yourself because you're at the same company. Make sure you always have the mutual connection. So in this case, the referral. So whoever referred you to the person should be in the subject of your email, and you should mention it in the first line or two of the email. And then, of course, you always want to push toward an in-person meeting. There are a few exceptions to this. One is what I mentioned here, where if you're just trying to get headhunter contact information, for example, if you're interested in interviewing for buy-side jobs, then you don't really need to have an in-person meeting with the person. You just need to get the contact information. So if that's the case, and let's say your contact is traveling right now, then it's fine to just ping them, email them, and ask for the contact information. You don't need to have an in-person meeting to get that. But assuming that you're asking for advice or maybe for introductions in a different group at your bank or something along those lines, then an in-person meeting is the way to go. And I say meeting here, but this is actually very casual. The preferred way to do this, I would say, is to just grab coffee for 10 or 15 minutes and to make your request then and to make it very natural and make it fit into the conversation. And as I say here, the main difference between this email template and some of the others that we looked at is that you can be even more casual here and the logistics are easier because presumably they're at the same office and it's going to be easier to meet them in person. So here's an example of an email template that you might send to a coworker who knows a lot about private equity recruiting. Maybe he's been interviewing around and you want to find out information from him and potentially get referrals to firms that are hiring or to headhunters or both. You see in the subject right here, it says private equity recruiting referral from coworker who referred you. The reason we're saying this right here is because we want to be very direct and get right to the point, which is we want to know more about the recruiting process for buy-side jobs. We got a referral from this coworker. Now, this works, of course, if we don't know this person as well and this coworker that referred us has a better relationship. Same concept as when you get referred from someone in your professional network or when you're doing informational interviews, you always want to put the school that you went to in case you're contacting an alumni in the subject of your emails as well. We see here the email, we start out with the first name. This is fine even if you're contacting someone at a higher level, in most cases at a bank. Unless it's a really, really formal work environment, it's pretty much accepted to just use people's first names. And then the first paragraph here, we just see the introduction. I hope all is well. I was speaking with, and just name the coworker here who referred you. And he mentioned that you're pretty knowledgeable about the private equity recruiting process. If this were a conversation, we could be a bit less formal than this. We could just say something like, I heard you're interviewing for a lot of buy side jobs, or I heard you've been really busy doing private equity recruiting lately, something like that, and get right to the point. But in this case, we're kind of shielding what we're really saying here a little bit by saying that this person's pretty knowledgeable about the private equity recruiting process. So we're not outright saying, I know you've been interviewing a lot, let me hear from you and let me know everything that you know. We're really making more of an indirect request and an indirect reference here to what our coworker friend might have told us. And then in this next paragraph, so it's important to note here that this person's saying it's still early for me. So he's probably a first year analyst or perhaps an associate even who is just starting, and maybe he's been here for a few months. So it is still pretty early in the timeline for him. And he's saying, but I just want to make sure I'm prepared for recruiting later this year. So he's using this wording to indicate that he's trying to prepare for the future and that even though it is early in his timeline, he does want to get all the information, and he's kind of using this as a reason why and a justification for contacting the person. No matter what kind of networking you're doing, the reason why is always important to have in these types of emails and casual requests. And then he's just suggesting a specific time frame here to meet with this person. So saying 15 minutes to grab coffee on Thursday or Friday this week. This is fine. Even though this is a coworker, you still don't want to say something like, oh, let's meet up this week, or oh, let's meet up sometime in the next 2 weeks. That's a very vague request. It's better to give specific days. It would be even better if you could say something like, let's meet up on Thursday afternoon. Are you free between 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock? It's not completely necessary, and especially if they're working in the same building or the same office, then it's not 100% necessary because they can just go and meet up with each other in person very easily. But it would have been a good idea to be even more specific here than this person is. And then at the end here, he says physically where he is, the building number, the floor number, and then he gives his own phone number or he offers up the option of just dropping by his desk. So in this case, there are a couple scenarios, a couple ways this could play out. The person he's contacting could just call him up and say, hey, why don't you just swing by my desk right now? I'm not doing anything. Or he could just say, hey, you know what? I'm free right now. Let's go grab coffee. So there are a number of different ways this could play out, but you can see how he's making it casual. He's making it easy to contact him because he's telling him exactly where he is and giving him his phone number, and also offering up that he could actually just stop by physically, go to his cubicle or go to his desk and chat. So as I say here, there really is not a whole lot to this. The key points here are to always mention how you refer, the mutual connection that I spoke about before. Then be specific in terms of dates and times with your in-person meeting request. And again, I'm saying the word meeting here, but I would not even use this word in your email if you're talking to a coworker. It makes it sound too formal. I would just use wording like this, 15 minutes to grab coffee. That makes it sound very informal, very casual, even if you have a more serious request, like getting headhunter contact information or being referred to firms that he has actually interviewed with and he knows are hiring. And then, of course, you always want to tell them where you are physically and give them the option to just drop by. Now, if you're trying to reach a coworker who's located across the country, obviously you're not going to do this. It doesn't really make any sense. So in that case, you would probably just give your phone number and they would have your email address because you're emailing them. They know your name because you're emailing them. So there are a couple different ways this could play out, but that's the basic outline of what I would do here. And as I say here, you don't really need to give as much of an introduction, which is in contrast to informational interview request emails where you need to tell them a little bit more about yourself to qualify yourself, show them that you've done some of your own homework before, and that you're reasonably intelligent, you know something about the industry. If you don't hear back in terms of follow-up here, I would again keep it very casual. I wouldn't even bother emailing him again. I would just stop by his cubicle if at all possible. I would just get his phone number. That's another option if you have some kind of internal database that lists everyone's phone number, which most banks do, or just send him an instant message if you have that option available. But keep the follow-up very casual and informal here, and there's really nothing to say about it. You just simply follow up and say, hey, I just shot you an email a couple of days ago. Just want to see if you'd have time today to go grab coffee. Just something like that would be fine in terms of follow-up here. And then the final point here, remember that in-person meetings are the better and more natural option with coworker networking. Of course, you do have to use email sometimes, as is the case here, where maybe we don't know the person that well, or the person referring us doesn't know the person that well. Maybe they're traveling at the moment, but we really need contact information, or we really need to get some type of question answered. So there are cases where email is appropriate and where email may actually be better to use, and this template should serve you very well should you find yourself in one of those scenarios. But do keep in mind that if at all possible, try to make it more casual. So go in person, go over instant messenger. When you're out with coworker friends, just bring it up during dinner or during lunch or something when you're grabbing food together. So hopefully you should have an idea now of how you network with coworkers and can make casual requests via email.